What's up, dude? You would ask for a little advice as to form critique for your kettlebell hip thrust, so I figured I'd give it to you. I hope you don't mind. So, kettlebell hip thrust. This is essentially a ballistic deadlift, which means that apples to apples, the movement should be very much the same. The joint mechanics should be very much the same. The only thing that's different is, one, the amount of control that's required to decelerate and stabilize the weight, and the amount of power created by your glutes and your hamstrings in order to lift this weight. So we're going to scratch the first 2 or 3. We'll give you those just to allow you to get into form. We'll look starting here. All right, what I would suggest is when you're in the top of your kettlebell hip thrust, you essentially want to be in the top of your dumbbell or your barbell deadlift. Shoulders over hips, over knees, over heels. Okay, you're a little bit out of whack here. Obviously, you're pulling back against that kettlebell. That's a pretty heavy kettlebell. So we're going to see a few things kind of fall to the wayside here. Natural, but certainly something that you want to pay attention to. I would recommend that when you're at the top of this swing, your quads are squeezed, your knees are straight, your chest is proud, and you've got a good neutral spine. All right, and we see the similar kind of configuration at the top of your swing for just about all of the repetitions. Okay, furthermore, I want to note that there should be 0 involvement of your deltoids for this exercise. It's not a shoulder exercise unless you're deliberately intending it to be so. Those fingers really just serve as hooks. Those arms are connecting that weight to your torso, and by the forceful thrust of your glutes, the forceful contraction of your glutes and your hips thrust forward, naturally this kettlebell is going to serve as a pendulum and swing forward. So, ballistic deadlift, it is a hip-driven, a glute-driven exercise. Here at the bottom of your movement, you really want to keep that chest up. Neutral spine throughout the entire duration of the movement, all right? But we want to find that neutral spine. You are going to work to keep that chest up. This way you've got a good neutral configuration, and you also want to do your best to keep your knees over at least the balls of your foot, if not your heels. And the reason why that is when those glutes squeeze and thrust your hips forward, all right, glutes, one of the primary function of the glute is hip extension. As that hip extends, okay, so as the femur moves this way, you really want a connection to the earth that is parallel and in direct opposition to the direction that gravity is pulling you. So here, when your glutes squeeze, if we look at it just at this angle, when your glutes squeeze and thrust your hips forward, you're really producing force this way. All right, it's inefficient. It's certainly not bad, but you're wasting a lot of energy, and naturally we see your lower back picking up the slack for that. So let's pay attention to the joint mechanics here: knees, hips, and particularly the lower back. Okay, I see you standing up straighter here. Certainly more lumbar extension than hip extension. Hip extension begins to occur. All right, you're up on your toes. That's just a counterbalance against that weight. And then you're leaning back pretty good. All right, there's about a dozen or so different variations of deadlift. Therefore, there's probably going to be about a dozen or so variations of the kettlebell hip thrust. But it is a hip thrust. It's not a hip swing. So focus on the forceful and ballistic contraction of those glutes, extending the hip, okay, which is going to drive a parallel lower leg into the floor. So knee somewhere here or back. All right, and chest proud. Ideally, if those glutes are squeezed, your quads are squeezed, and your shoulders are pulled back, which they really should be, you're going to end up in triple extension here. And then one last bit. When you're doing the exercise, once you can get that chest up, yeah, you see how those knees move? There's a whole lot of body English here that doesn't need to be. Once you get the mechanics of it down and you're able to really program keeping that chest up and your spine in a neutral position, you want to try to reach that kettlebell back behind you as far as you can. But don't do that unless you're comfortable with the neutrality of your spine, because otherwise you can obviously lean over a significant amount in order to push that kettlebell behind you. But, you know, if I give you 2 things to think about here, it would be configure your body in such a way where you feel your weight on your heels, number one. And number two, thrusting those hips forward, which is naturally going to extend your lumbar spine and extend your knee. All right, give those things a shot, man. I'm interested to know if they work for you.